Thank you very much to everyone for joining this webinar, especially on a Friday afternoon. I really appreciate you making the time and also submitting some really interesting questions that we'll have time to look at later. So my name is Alicia Greated. I'm the Chief Executive for KTN, and I'm joined by three really interesting panellists who I'll introduce you to in a moment. We're also joined by my colleague, Alan Cowie. Alan, do you want to wave? Alan will be moderating the chat box, and later in the discussion, he'll share with us any questions or comments coming from you all. So if you do want to ask questions, please make use of the chat function. Thank you. So as we're all aware, sitting in this webinar, COVID-19 has had a massive impact on all of us in many different ways. And in one way, it's led to a worldwide pause. So aircraft have been grounded with runways lying idle. Where I'm sitting now is very near Edinburgh Airport, and we've hardly seen any planes at all over the last 3 months. We've also experienced empty motorways for weeks on end, and road use has decreased by 70%. And our demand for electricity has dropped. And in the UK, we've gone without coal-fired power generation for the longest stretch since the Industrial Revolution. So air quality as a result has improved worldwide, which is fantastic. But the question is, what will happen going forward? Will this change in behaviour and attitudes continue? For example, we know that air pollution in China is now back to pre-COVID levels. So we're now faced with loads of opportunities, but lots of challenges and lots of questions. And I've got three super panel members who will help us explore some of these questions. So now I'm going to introduce you to our panelists. So we have Mel, Christine and Peter, and I'll introduce you to each of them. So guys, if you could just give a wee wave when I introduce you. So first we have Mel Bryce. So Mel is a chartered engineer. She spent her entire career in the energy industry, covering a whole range of varied senior roles. Mel currently works for one of the big six energy companies, SSE, Scottish and Southern Electricity Networks, as the Oxfordshire Programme Director. And as part of that, Mel sits on the team assessing the impacts of COVID-19, so she comes with lots of useful knowledge. Christine Boyle is our next panel member. I should say Christine Boyle, MBE. Christine is the founder of, the founder and CEO of Synergy, a company that develops and manufactures solar thermal energy panels. Christine's had 20 years experience in the commercial roofing industry, and she combined that expertise with the expertise of leading engineers to develop her company, Synergy. And Christine was awarded an MBE for her services to business in Northern Ireland. And she's also a winner of Innovate UK's Women in Innovation Prize. So another person with lots of knowledge to contribute. And then last but definitely not least, we have Peter Gudde. Peter, hi Peter. Peter works for the Greater South East Energy Hub, which is funded by BEIS. The hub provides support to the public sector around clean growth and local energy. Peter's got lots of experience designing and managing local authority energy programs for over 20 years, including leading on the sustainable energy agenda. And in that time, Peter's been involved in a whole range of projects developing local authority-based climate strategy. And he was also a founding member of the Suffolk Climate Change Partnership. So we've just got loads of knowledge between these three people, so I'm really looking forward to this discussion. So without further ado, let's hear from our panel. So I'd like to start by asking you all about the impact of COVID-19, which I've just been talking about. So we know the pandemic has resulted in really big changes in emissions and energy use. So how do you feel we maintain this impetus? How do we maintain those behaviours and not immediately slip back into pre-COVID-19 ways? Christine, do you want to just kick us off with that?
Yeah, absolutely. I think now is a really timely opportunity to build on the momentum that we have. I think governments have recognised it both nationally and locally, and the wider population has got on board with lesser emissions and the better world that we could possibly build out of this. There's also been the repercussions in terms of what we could do with new industry, new ideas, innovation, of course, for myself would be a big thing. So I think the most important thing coming out of this is really strong leadership for a truly green economy going forward, and passionate leaders that are getting behind the story of building a new, bigger, better future for everyone. I think the Committee on Climate Change and Chris Stark, with quotes like that we can't lock into fossil fuels anymore, that it must be a just transition towards a new net zero solution. And we can't make the same mistakes that were made in 2008-2009 stimulus package, when it just led to global emissions rebounding. So we have to take this opportunity. We have to understand that it's a long-term plan. I envisage it's a 10-year long-term plan going forward, and we allow the time and the resources to get it right. I think it's important that we then match policy with the sustainability solutions that we've come up with, and it's very important the government gets behind in terms of legislation and regulation, as well as funding and resources to build a better future.
So Christine, just before we hear from other people, just on leadership then, do you mean from really government? Is that what you mean mainly, or is it across every part of the sector?
Yeah, I think it's across the board. So leadership in terms of government, both national and local, leadership in corporates, leadership in SMEs, and leadership in the home, in schools and offices, where people are actually saying, if you're the person leading the home, then you've got to make the decisions within that home that make the decision. And I think this will only happen if we all lead collectively.
Yeah, thank you. Any other thoughts from our panel members?
Yeah, I would agree with Christine that leadership is absolutely key in making this exit from COVID and making sure that we make the most of this opportunity. And it's not an opportunity that's going to last forever. We're going to have to move quite quickly to effect any real change within our organizations. So it's not a matter of months even. This is probably a matter of weeks, 2 months, that we've got to embed some of the behavior changes that we're seeing, especially in our people, in terms of ways of working, in using tech, in managing change, all of these things. If we can grab the opportunity now and take it forwards, then that's how we're going to make the most of the opportunity that comes. With any crisis, there's generally an opportunity, and we've found people moving so much more quickly with things that otherwise would have held them back. So things, for example, like paperless, we're all paperless now, and travel, we're all doing Zoom. It's all these things that have just happened overnight, and we've got to embed it in the culture now.
I think I'd endorse that. I think there's part of the population that has had to and really taken on board some of these changes, and they benefit ourselves, benefit the individual as well as the organisation in terms of savings, much as anything. I mean, the transport issue and the cost of commuting and the time spent commuting, for example, there must be a lot of people who have realised that it is their time, and how can you benefit from that? So at an individual level, I think there'll be a move that people do anyway now, because they have had the opportunity of seeing this. It's been a really challenging time, but they've had the opportunity to see these new ways of working and be able to realise that. I think at national government level, we need to make sure, because there's such a small time window at the moment, to embed clean growth principles into the investment planning process now. And also to translate that down to local level. Local politicians pre-COVID were very stimulated by the climate emergency agenda. And I think there's a joining up of the dots between national and local level there. I would like to see, hopefully, that momentum that was beforehand around the climate agenda taken forward through and embedded within COVID recovery plans. And we've been supporting local enterprise partnerships and local authorities over the last few weeks around how does that look for investable projects in the energy, in terms of local energy.
Thank you. So you mentioned as part of that feedback about the role of innovation, like we've got this opportunity, everything's moving really quickly and we're thinking differently. and innovation and thinking differently is really important for that change. Can you just, maybe Peter, if you kick off, could you just talk a bit about what you think we've learned through this process and the role of innovation in terms of building our economic recovery?
Well, the necessity of change that we've experienced now has really shown that we can innovate if we need to. A lot of the skills, technologies, and solutions are already there. It's how we translate them into our daily lives and into our organisational lives. So from a public sector perspective, I think the innovation or the shock of COVID has been driving different approaches that have been there probably in the private sector but not been adopted so much in the public sector, but now they're here and present. We see a lot of projects and a lot of initiatives that need now to be given a lot more visibility. And we need to mine that innovation, gather that innovation, whether it's through national programs like Innovate UK or the Systems Catapult, or local innovation projects, and translate those and replicate those really quickly. And that's part of what we're trying to achieve. We've seen local communities coming forward prior to COVID with initiatives, whether it's around energy generation or whether it's around heat or transportation. But those skills and those knowledge, we can harness those, I think, if we can have a coherent way of taking innovation forward. I think of Project Leo, Mel's project, some of the stuff that's coming out there, name check you guys, it's fantastic. It's in our patch. How can we translate what you're doing there into other parts of the area very quickly? So that's really important, to be able to mine that knowledge, share it and move it through very quickly and learn from it. Make it easy. Make it much easier for people to be able to take up innovation and move it into their own lives, into their own businesses.
So Christine and Mel, you've both, thank you Peter for that, you've both been heavily involved in innovation and using that for the companies that you're working in. Do you have anything to add to what Peter said?
Yeah, definitely. I think that, innovation is absolutely key, and you often find there's lots of people with innovative ideas, but it's getting it all lined up and coherent and into a proper structure that can then actually impact some real change when it comes to things like policy, because what we'll find is there's lots of ideas, but when you actually come to try and implement them, there's sometimes things in the way that need to change, and these are large things, sometimes at a national level. So if you can join groups with other innovators, then you have a stronger voice and more likely to be heard. And that's very much what we're doing in Leo as part of the PIFA program, so Prospering from the Energy Revolution program. We're joining up with the other demonstrator projects to see, what we can learn from the projects that we are running at the moment in the area of energy and innovation. So very much looking at trialing local generation, local communities, how we can manage things locally in the energy space. So yeah, getting those things all together is very important.
And I think to add to that, so I think in the past innovation was much easier. So you just came up with a new product, it belonged to you, it belonged to your company, and you pushed it out there, and you got your patent. I think nowadays innovation is really, really complex, and they talk about open innovation. For instance, in our case, it's not just innovating in terms of the materials that we use, it's innovating in terms of the advanced manufacture, it's innovating in terms of digitalization and data, it's innovating in terms of the business model that we use and how we're going to provide this new product out into the market. And it just becomes really, really complex. So to ensure success, I think the complexity is made much easier when you collaborate. And I think the collaboration, as Mel said, the collaboration between SMEs who are very quick and agile in what they can do, and large corporates who can add the value and experience and expertise that they've built through the years. And I think when you bring those two things together, there's a spark happens that really creates new innovation. So for me, I think it's not an easy route. And as I said earlier, nothing happened overnight. Everyone thinks it does. Everyone thinks that new thing just appeared, but actually someone was working on it for 10, 15 years prior to that. So it is much more complex, it's much more difficult, and it needs patience, perseverance, and resources.
Can I just come in there? I think that's a really valuable point. You've talked about the private sector. I mean, we represent and we work for local government, and there's always a challenge that local government doesn't innovate. It's slow to move, and I think there's a need both to learn from the private sector, but also to recognise it's not just about the technologies. It's about those business models that can hopefully develop and enable the private sector to grow. So if the public sector can engage, as it is doing in a lot of areas, can engage really effectively with the private sector and its local communities, it can be the test bed, the place to allow that innovation to happen, to support it, and develop new relationships. The local authority space is one that maybe it shouldn't always enter into some of the areas that private sector go in, definitely because of some of the things we're bound by. But I think also we can provide that landscape, that local area for innovation to happen, whether that's through policy landscape or whether that's through support, or being able to bring local partners together. So I think there's a relationship between the private sector, the public sector, and the local communities there that I think we can build on and work towards much more embedded innovation in our localities, in our places.
I'm so glad, Peter, you've mentioned non-technical innovation, because it's something I think we're very focused on the technical aspects a lot, especially with funding. In a second, I'm going to pass over to Alan, because I think there's lots of chat on the chat room. But I just wanted to pick up one point that's particularly close to my heart and what we do at KTN is you've mentioned, all of you, very clearly about the importance of building groups or communities, especially between boundaries between an SME or a big company, or with government and a whole variety, and academia. So I'm just wondering, especially for Melanie, from Mel coming from a big company, and Christy, when you started a small company, just very quickly, how do you go about finding those partners? I know I think my answer to that use KTN. But what would some practical brief tips be if there's people listening in, either from a bigger company or they're starting out? I don't know, Peter, you might want to add as well from the more community or policymaker side, but just how do you find those partners?
Yeah, I think for me, it was looking for the people who had the problem. So people always want to open the door if you're going to talk about their problem. So rather than arriving up with, I have a new technology, or I have this new way of thinking, or I have a new way of doing stuff, it's looking to see who are the people, scan the market, who are the people really are suffering from the problem that you think you can solve, and then going and having a chat about that problem. And then I think that evolves into the innovation process, because really what you should be doing is, with your technology, is designing it for the core problem of whatever that customer has. And I think that's key to the actual process. I think Peter touched on it there. When you open up the possibilities of cross collaboration, you get that opportunity that the person with the idea actually really matches the customer and the corporate's actual deep problem. And when you do that, then you really come up with a successful solution that has value and has a customer who's prepared to pay for that value.
Yeah, no, definitely. We're very fortunate in LEO project, Local Energy Oxfordshire, that we have a great consortium right across the energy supply chain. And that's really the key to its success. And it's not easy getting that set up in the first place. But once it is set up, it's very valuable to have that level of representation, right across your public sector, your councils, academia, you've got private companies, you've got companies developing platforms. And because energy is so complex, and in the UK, especially our energy, the way that it is set up is especially difficult to get your head around sometimes. I think it's good to have all those people collaborating together.
Thank you.
I'd reiterate those points. I think it's really hard. I can appreciate Christine's position as an SME trying to get a product into a locality, and you want the public sector to support you, and sometimes the way that public sector has worked prevents that happening. But I think there's some real opportunities for those relationships to be built, whether it's through KTN, whether it's through other initiatives through the local enterprise partnerships, whether it's through individual local authorities who are out there doing stuff that they're looking for partners to get in. I know some really, really innovative local authorities, in relative terms, of course, who are looking for partners, and that they're out there, and success breeds success, doesn't it? I mean, if you see somebody who's doing stuff and you can have part of it and your first project's successful, you'll start building those relationships much more quickly, and hopefully we can then replicate those and pass those out and share that learning very quickly. And so a network is really important in that respect.
Thank you. So Alan's told me that the live chat is lively, so we have some questions for panelists that have come from our audience. So Alan, would you like to highlight any comments that have come in?
Yeah, thank you, Alicia. We've got hundreds online, and the chat box is going a bit mad. Mark says the resources needed for green projects cannot be expected from government as the epidemic has been so expensive. Private sector investment will be needed, requiring commercially viable projects. Here's an interesting thought from Stephen, who says, am I alone in thinking that some of the am I alone in seeing some of the negative environmental consequences, such as the avoidance of public transport? So really good point. And then Martin asks, well, he says, completely agree with the comments you were making, Christine, on the opportunities for leadership within sustainability, but asks, what regulation do you feel we need?
Thanks, Alan. So do you pick up any of those points?
I'll answer the point on the regulation. So I think it's very important for, and we do have this with KTN, with Innovate UK, and with BES, particularly around energy, staying close to new innovations that are coming through and ensuring that policy is matched to allow those to get to market. Because you know, if you come up with a completely new way of doing things, then it's not going to fit with the landscape that's already out there. So there has to be that closeness into whoever your funders are, staying close, particularly public funding and grant funding, and feeding in that information to the policymakers that they can adjust and adapt policy for new innovation coming through. I definitely would agree with public and private funding needing to come in, and again, that's where the strong leadership comes in. You know, so they have the voice of the public purse within Treasury, and they also have inroads into corporate investment, and I think it's their duty to get a match between corporate and public and private investment to ensure that we can scale out and benefit from new innovation.
Can I just come in on the investment bit? And I totally get what the person on the chat room is saying in terms of you can't rely on government to bring the money forward. It's Community Energy Fortnight, and focusing on local energy for a moment. There's a real opportunity to look at blended finance, and it's also a case of how you value that project. If you're working purely off payback, then a lot of energy projects won't fly. But if you're looking at the co-benefits of these projects for the long term, whether it's around community well-being, whether it's around air quality, whether it's around the ability for that value and those jobs to be retained locally, those are tangible co-benefits that we need to be better at understanding how we measure and better at communicating when we're making the business case. If you work purely on rates of return, then you will struggle to get a lot of these projects across the line, particularly as they've been driven by tariff or other funding mechanisms that subsidise. We're in a post-subsidy world for a lot of these projects, and with energy prices so low, projects are going to struggle. So we need to find other ways of making these projects attractive and other ways of financing them. And we're starting to see new finance innovation come in to be able to support that. So I'm very much more optimistic than saying it's purely about government funding these things.
Yeah, I'd like to come in there. It's very much about, getting the market right and getting the market mechanisms in place that stimulates the investment, especially at what we're calling the grid edge. So at the edge of the grid, so this is the local areas, this is the LV 11 kV network, getting the community involvement and making sure that we can get investment in these areas so that we can kind of localize the supply chain for energy. So we've been, more local in the last few months. People are getting to know parts of the locality that they haven't seen before. They're probably shopping more locally. Why not translate that into getting your energy more locally as well? If you have a power station just down the road, a hydro station, you might want to know, well, why is my energy not coming directly from that? So these are the sorts of questions that are being thrown up at the moment and that we're hoping to answer through some of the innovation projects we're working on.
We've got a private members bill going through at the moment, Peter Aldous' bill, the local electricity bill, which is putting forward that new model. There is inertia within the regulatory system and the markets around the ability to buy and use energy locally, generate it locally and use it locally. There's innovation in the market, but we do need to have more flexibilities to allow that. And there are real tangible benefits to doing that. So let's see how that progresses. It's really important.
So we got some questions before, some pre-questions, and one of the questions was about, I'm just reading it here, was about community and decentralized energy. Another question was around what opportunities does the panel see in working together in new ways? And that's at national and regional and local levels. So how do you see those different ways of working together? We've talked a lot about local and we've talked a lot about collaboration.
Can I kick off? Given that we're funded by national government, but we work locally, and we're very much supporting local authorities and local enterprise partnerships, these economic agents of change in local areas. There's a real opportunity for projects and to flush them out and to give them support. The challenge is there's a lack of capacity at local level, and arguably that innovation that we talked about earlier, it's not got the exposure to be able to translate that across. So the ability to identify where there's an opportunity and to be able to garner or mine what's going on elsewhere, bring that to the local level and then replicate that up. Arguably that could be through procurement arrangements, or it could be about co-investment. So that there are ways and opportunities that are now coming forward, and particularly with the climate emergency declarations at local authorities, with 280 odd declaring out of 408 across the UK. There's a will, but where's the plan? So we need a coherent plan to deliver this. Where that joins up with national government through the clean growth principles, through the regional local enterprise partnerships, or at local level down to town halls. It's really important.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more. I think we need a plan. We've got the opportunity. There's, in terms of our technology, there's 300,000 homes per year to be built. So there's an opportunity to build those better, to make them cutting edge new homes with sustainable jobs, local growth, and the opportunity to also export skills and technology that we develop. So yeah, there's a fantastic opportunity there. It's just, I think you're absolutely right, Peter. We need a plan.
Sorry, Mel, you go first.
I was just going to say, I think historically, it's been very much nationally driven, and now we really do need to go down to the local level. Scottish and Southern Electricity Networks, we represent, the very north of Scotland and the south of England, and those two areas are so different that when we're putting forward plans for the development of those networks, we need to look at the local level, and we need to have local plans that are absolutely tailored to growth in local areas before we can think about what sort of investment opportunities we're going to be looking at.
I just want to build on that because we've talked a lot about the need for pace. So there's a great opportunity. It's a long-term opportunity, but we need to start thinking about this now, and we need a plan. Who's responsible? Who out of us? Is it us? Who's responsible for making that plan? Are we waiting for that plan, or is there ways that all the people dialing into this and that us on this call, how do we influence or shape the plan that's needed?
Well, arguably we can't afford to wait. I mean, if you're looking at, just step away from COVID for a moment, if you're seeing local authorities and government declaring zero carbon, okay, we're working at 2050 national target. Local government has, some of them, majority declared 2030. And so if you spend the first year looking for a plan, okay, you need one. You've only got 9 years to decarbonise. A little bit tricky. So there's a responsibility of national government to give us the landscape and give us the framework to work within. And it's a responsibility of all of us to bring together what we know and have quick ways of building those plans. So there is a template that we could follow. There is going to be locality differences, and we do need to recognise the diversity of the energy system, that we need the big stuff as well as the small stuff. But it is incumbent on local government and some of the agents of change, like local enterprise partnerships, working with partners, with private sector, with communities to be able to do that. But we do need to work within a national framework. And there's no mandate, there's no obligation, apart from the metro mayors through the city deals. There's no mandate currently for local authorities to focus on climate change. It's stretched across all of their functions, and that's quite hard to deal with.
Anything else to add? So I'm going to take us on to a slightly different question that was raised. It's about the longer term implications of COVID-19 on the energy sector. So what do you think? You've covered this in some of the questions, but what do you think the long-term impact is going to be on the sector as a whole? And Mel, do you want to, since you're one of the big six,
yes.
do you want to start with?
Yeah, absolutely. I think it's an absolutely massive opportunity for anybody who's working in energy. And specifically, I think we've seen over the last couple of months, the number of inquiries for electric vehicles has risen significantly. I think people maybe have slightly more time on their hands to be able to contemplate what their next vehicle is going to be. So the electrification of transport is obviously, a massive opportunity to decarbonise and also to grow innovative and new business models that maybe we haven't seen yet. The other area is heat, so low carbon technologies for heat, very much looking at what the future holds for those, how we can incorporate them into our homes, be that retrofit to existing homes or part of a new sort of green jobs, green sort of buildings that we'll be looking at for the future. And then we have the other areas around sort of generation, so how to decarbonise the generation fleet and the gas network, how to replace that, potentially hydrogen and CCS and that sort of thing, to be able to manage our electricity network going forward. So absolutely masses of opportunities that we see, and it's how to make sure we can bring them forwards as quickly as possible. As Peter was saying, we haven't got as long as you might think to get this to happen, so there's going to be need to be a push from government to accelerate things like the electrification of transport, strategic take in EVs, the commercialization of fleets. It's all of these things. This is a massive opportunity to stimulate the economy and use it to have a green recovery.
Can I just come in? I think one of the key changes I hope to see, and that's been a change that's been going on in the last 5 to 10 years, is more diversity in terms of the participants in the energy sector. Okay, that creates difficulty in terms of the policy landscape and the regulatory landscape for those new entrants, because it's a hard sector to get into. Particularly if you're a small community energy group or a local authority that's not used to that. So I think there'll be more diversity in the sector, big stuff and the small stuff coming through, and that can only really be a good thing. It is complicated, but hopefully that will be important. You mentioned heat and transportation, the two big stalled areas in terms of decarbonisation. Again, we need a good plan around EV infrastructure rollout, and the market working with the public sector needs to be part of that. So yeah, I think diversity in the market and diversity in the sector is going to be more of that.
Yeah, I think the most important thing in terms of fuel poverty is that whatever solutions we do come up with, that we bring everyone with us, so that some of the solutions aren't just made for those who can afford to retrofit or put in new renewable systems, and then you leave people behind. I think just even with COVID-19, that even coming into this winter, if we have an economic crisis and we have extreme fuel poverty and people can't afford to heat their houses, are they more susceptible to another stage of COVID-19? So there are serious repercussions in the short term, but I think it's really, really important that we make sure and make energy affordable for all in the solutions that we are bringing forward.
Yeah, that's a very big and important point to make, Christine. Thank you, and everyone. So Alan's got some more comments from the chat room. I've got questions as well, but we'll pass on to Alan just to hear what comments are coming in and if you want to respond. Alan?
Thank you, Alicia. Yes, Richard says the mention of resilience is interesting. There's an inherent tension between resilience and efficiency that lies at the heart of the design for sustainability challenge. And Mike says innovation isn't easy. It will be more essential than ever to align with strategic goals and pick the winners with increased levels of scrutiny and financial constraints. And then he asks, will there be opportunities for alternative technologies for low emission transportation? He says it feels like we've got all of our eggs in the BEV basket, whereas hydrogen and biogas could be part of the mix.
I'll pick up on the resilience and innovation. I think we need to understand that innovation is a long play, and it's not efficient at the beginning. So if anybody says that innovation and efficiency go together, they don't. What it does, it's a long play, and that you hope that in the end that you'll get both efficiency and resilience if you innovate. So that's why it's important that we take the long play on this, and that investors we have patient investors, and we have investors that see the long-term opportunity but are willing to take that long-term investment.
Are there any other comments on those questions? There was also the one about picking winners and also opportunities for low emission vehicles. If I'm right, Alan.
I mean, just on that side of things, clearly electrification is not going to be this. It's not the silver bullet for some vehicle types, whether it's HGV or air travel. You know, just the energy density is not there with hydrogen. So we're gonna have to, with electricity, we've got to find some other ways of delivering that. Certainly in the public sector, we'd be keen to hear how technology and innovation around decarbonisation of HGV fleets can be solved, so that it may not be about electrification, maybe about hydrogen. We need to see how we can bring that forward. And there's certainly there are projects happening in our patch around bus fleets and refuse freighters as examples where hydrogen could be a play. Be part of that solution, but we're keen. We need to know, what are the best runners to follow? What are the best things to back? So you do need to accept some things aren't going to be successful. That's innovation. You can't always go with the first solution and it being the right one. So inevitably there are going to be times when we back the wrong things. But it's minimising the backing the wrong things, having good thinking about how we make those decisions.
Yeah, I think it's good to, identify what can happen and what can happen quickly, but not to lose sight of other things that are also out there in terms of, reducing emissions and that sort of thing. So although electric vehicles might seem like the right thing at the moment, this is quite a long-term game that we're in, and more innovations will come up in the future. And, it's good to keep an eye on everything that's going on to meet our targets as quickly as we can.
Thank you. So one of the questions that came in as well before we started this, which relates to money as well and investment, is especially I think from Christine, who's had experience on this. What advice can you give to people who are listening now, who are startups or that are just very early stage building their companies, to try and secure grants and raise finance around either green tech or the clean tech sectors?
And I know I've I'm continuously saying about the long term for innovation. But I think when you start at the beginning, there's a long journey ahead. And what you have to do is take each step of funding that you're going for as just the step that gets you to the next milestone. So you've got a lot of miles to go. But if you each step of funding is to get you from where you are to the next milestone. So whether that be proof of concept, into prototype, into pilot, into demo, into larger scale demo, into securing your first customer. But each piece of pot of funding has to get you to the next milestone, and you have to then over deliver. So you need to do more than you said you were going to do. Over deliver on what your promises were for that milestone, and that will allow you then to get to the next stage. But I think patience and perseverance. I think someone said to me that they thought I must have been injected with bucket loads of patience and perseverance, but that's exactly what is needed. And I think that's also needed from the investment community as well, to understand that if you want to get the real innovations out in, you need patience and perseverance to get there.
And what about you, Melanie Peter? You must be coming into contact with different organisations and company all the time. Do you have any views to build on what?
Yeah, I think it's looking for the long term. I think people are looking for good longer term investments and are more likely to have a portfolio of innovations that they want to back and take forwards. But as Christine says, it's very much a long term gain. So you can go and you can get your grant for your next milestone, but if you want investment, then it's looking more to the long term, to what it is that you are actually offering, and being able to over deliver is always a good thing. So being clear on what it is that you can actually deliver for that grant and make sure that you hit it, or over deliver if you can, is a great way then to go ahead and secure more funding.
I just endorse that. I think if you having success early on really makes a difference, and I think the challenge, I can feel the challenge for SMEs in terms of what they face in order to get to that point, to that first success, in order to get their visibility up and get their product moved to the next level. All I can say is I would hope that we, through the local authorities and local enterprise partnerships, can be more wise to that, how we can support, particularly at this time where we need to support businesses that are going to be really struggling over the next year and a half. We need to figure out how effectively we can provide that support, provide that landscape for those businesses to take that next step and move their innovation forward.
So, guys, you all come from an energy background, but this topic about how we build a green society, the green economy, is massive. And I was really interested to see if you have views. It would also be interesting to see what come in from the comments about other sectors beyond energy, around agri-food, around transport. We've had loads of comments about transport, around manufacturing, and what the scope for innovating is outside the energy sector. Do you have any thoughts on that from your experience? I don't know, Christine, if you want to kick off, it'd be good to get everyone's views on that.
I mean, the energy sector is the one sector that touches every other, because no sector can work without energy. So we're very fundamentally core to all of industry, and even in homes and offices, etc. So I think if we solve the energy problem, then we're helping solve a lot of the other the problems within manufacture, making more efficiency there, yeah. So there's a lot of problems can be solved in other sectors, and again, I'm a big supporter of collaborating within sectors, and I think that's important going forward as well.
Any other comments on that?
Yeah, I think local. I know we've talked quite a lot about local today, but especially in other sectors like agriculture, for example, I think being able to source your food locally and be more sustainable, that's a big area where you can potentially reduce carbon emissions and move forwards to a more sort of sustainable future, and probably one of the leading behind energy, one of the leading areas where that climate change can actually be impacted. So yeah, so agriculture is probably the second one that I would be thinking about.
I totally agree. I was just going to pick up on the health sector, housing, waste collection. All of these things touch our lives in some way, shape or form. All of them have embedded energy within them. We have to keep the lights on in our hospitals. We have to keep the lights on in homes. If we can be more efficient about how we use that resource, whether it's in using waste better, minimising and utilising the embedded energy within residual waste, whether it's around hospitals and how they operate to reduce their running costs through utilising low carbon technologies in an effective way. Improving their resilience, battery storage in terms of interruptible power supply in hospitals is a real key thing. We don't value that. Is there some way of translating? And so the health sector, the waste sector, and then building, the house building sector coming out of COVID. How can we build the better homes that are not just more energy efficient, but they're better to live in, and they're better for the next 50, 75 years. Because the homes we build now, we don't want to be 5 years down the road and have to be starting to retrofit them. We want to be building the homes that are good for the next 25, 30, 40 years up to 2050 and beyond.
I can see Christine nodding a lot, because I guess you're dealing with this on a day-to-day basis.
Yeah, and it's very much a lot of solutions coming together and really giving the time to think about what is right, not just for 10 years, 20 years, but the next 50 years, to make people happier and healthier in the way that they live. And we have a great opportunity to do that, but I don't think one solution fits all. It's about networking, spreading our collaboration opportunities, and finding the right solutions that fit, and making the right decisions, and then when we do, pushing those solutions out.
I don't know, I'm going to pass over to Alan in a second because there's more comments coming in, and I don't know, Christine, if you can answer this or if anyone can, but I'll try anyway. It's just, you talked really interestingly a few minutes ago about poverty and the fact people will not have as much money as they might have had before the crisis. So we're talking about, let's just say, solar panels, or the building new houses with technologies that we know are absolutely important for the future. How do we reconcile that? Or even, I mean, it might just be, what are the barriers, but are there any ways we can overcome those barriers? How do we do that?
So I suppose I'm going to say something that's very simplistic in my mind. So if you want to retrofit those or build new buildings or new homes that are energy efficient, and the homes that we have described, and you want to use new ways of new products and new manufacturing facilities and new installation and upskilling people in different technologies. So if you invest in all of those, then what that does is it actually provides jobs for people who live in those houses, and their local jobs and their labour intensive jobs, and then you build economies around that, because those people are going to spend the money they've earned within their communities. So for me, it's just a circular investment, that there will be a huge return on the investment for the UK or any other local or regional or national government that makes a decision to do this. So you're not just investing in the homes, the funding or the programs that you're planning to allow those new homes to be built or retrofit are actually, that funding is going straight back into the economy, which is then churning again. So yeah, that, for me, it's a very simplistic, I know it's a bigger plan and it's going to be more complex and complicated, but I think the simplicity is invest in ourselves, invest in your own people, in the skills, the technologies, and build a better world. And
I guess that comes down to the point about having a plan and all working together. So we need everybody working together on that. Before I go over to Alan, do any of you have any points before I just go over to Alan? No, I'll pass over. Alan, I think you've got some comments from the chat room.
Thanks, Alicia. Yeah, we've got 10 minutes to go, so still time to get your questions and comments in. And we've had a lot of questions coming in this afternoon. Just on the earlier discussion about transport, and a number of the panel mentioned this, but Roger summed up quite nicely. He said we need to take a step back on transport. Yes, electrification will remove pollution at use, but not make a huge impact on overall pollution worldwide. We need to reduce travel through things like smart cities, etc. So thanks for the comment, Roger. Anna says the local electricity bill was recently introduced to Parliament to help encourage community energy. Can the panel comment on the opportunities and challenges this could bring? And if you've got time, question from Craig, who asks, what's the impact of biofuels? Do the sources put pressure on food production capacity?
Well, that's an interesting question. So let's pick up the community one. That has come up, that came in pre-questions, it's come up a lot, and you've already, I think we definitely recognise the importance of that. Do you want to pick that up?
So there are some really nice business models coming out of new technologies. We have the heating as a service, where you know, people just pay for their heat being delivered, whether it be from the rooftop. I heard one a few weeks ago, building integration as a service. So the builder actually supplies the energy through whatever building he has constructed. So there are different ways within community, you know, so it's not just community owned, it can be owned by the developer, and then energy supplied. So there are lots of localized business models that are out there. I think it's number one, trialing and demonstrating and see what works. And at the end of the day, customer has to be at the core. So it's what the customer really, really wants. And then it's maybe looking at some of the bigger organizations. Mel can come in here, in terms of the larger energy organizations and how they think they would fit with those business models going forward, because it's a complete energy transition.
Yeah, no, definitely it is, and we're seeing a lot of this, and we're hearing a lot about it as well in our project. You know, the way that our markets are changing, new entrants are coming in, new services are being proposed for things that you wouldn't even have thought about, you know, maybe 5 years ago. So we're very lucky on the project to have community groups, and we've got the Low Carbon Hub, who are a social enterprise, and they do, you know, great work in the community on energy efficiency and education, as well as raising finance for local renewable schemes that they're looking at. So that's one model that we're working with at the moment on the project we're on, but there are others out there, and you know, they are sort of innovation in their own right. So we talked about the innovative tech. I think we've got to make sure that we talk about these innovative services as well, and that's a real, you know, opportunity area going forwards that we can look at with community energy especially.
That's really apposite, given it's Community Energy Fortnight, as I mentioned earlier, and the local electricity bill. One of the challenges is around the regulatory system and the way the electricity markets are managed, and some of the rules that prevent new entrants coming in, which are in many respects legacy rules. I mean, we need to move those rules on. Then there's inertia in the way the policy and regulatory landscape is set up that prohibits much of the new thinking around community energy coming in. Community Energy England has an aspiration of getting up to around about 5.2 gigawatts of generation by 2030. They're predicting that will generate 8,000 jobs and £1.8 billion worth of local value. So there is a real opportunity for the localities, for place, for innovation and multiple participation in these projects. It doesn't have to be solely led by one organisation. That does create its challenges. It may well be a private sector led with a community who can facilitate some of the relationships locally. Historically, big developers may rub up against local planning and local communities. Can we work in a better way, a collaborative way around that, much more effectively, so that local participants buy into good development rather than feel as though it's being done to them and they're not party to it?
So the point about regulation has come up as a question from the audience before we started this webinar, to ask about how regulators can support innovation and the green recovery. I think there's a recognition that people know that that's a bit of a barrier. How do we change that? What can we do as a group to try and change that?
Well, I think very much, learning from innovation projects that are on the go at the moment, engaging with regulators and also using the facilities that they are putting out there. So Ofgem, for example, are putting out sandbox facilities that we can use on innovation projects to see what may and may not work. So it's good to know there is, flexibility around the regulation as we start to inform policy changes for the future.
I think that's a really interesting area. There are areas in some of the networks where there are holes. There are deserts where power can't be got to development, particularly if you're looking at trying to develop a green community, a clean development. Even with all of the things you can build into that development, trying to get a connection can be a nightmare. And so the challenge there is who's going to invest in this investment ahead of need regulated model. At the moment, it's a barrier, and we need to find another way around that in order to allow long-term good growth to occur, good neighbourhoods to develop that have embedded some of the principles around clean growth. The challenge from DNO to DSO is that understanding from both parties as to we're both talking the same language. Local planners and network operators and energy companies and developers talk the same language, so we understand what we're talking about and we try and understand each other's needs a little bit more. I think the challenge is that conversation doesn't always happen in the right way. Maybe we need to find a better way of dealing with that.
I just wonder, one of the things we're thinking about, KTN, is that COVID has forced, in a way, people to collaborate more in ways they might not have done before. So I hope we can build on that energy to bring people in different ways that might not have happened. So hopefully there's a really big opportunity. I just want to make sure, I don't think we have any biofuel experts here, but we shall ask the question since it came up about biofuels. Do any of you feel you can make a comment on that? I can almost see slight panic.
I will try and make a comment on that. It's not my area of expertise, but I get the impression that biofuel, a bit like biomass, the carbon has to come from somewhere, unless it's a non-carbon based fuel, and therefore it maybe doesn't have the same sort of credentials that you might have from, say, a solar powered or solar charged electric vehicle. But I'd be happy to take other comments on that from some of the other panelists.
We're just looking at the biofuels, so biomass side of things, and don't take me as any expert whatsoever in this, but we are seeing projects not taking away land that are related to growing food, but utilising public space, for example. Green verges, spaces around major developments, which could be utilised for short rotation coppice, for example. I know Thurrock are working on a project where public land could be utilised that's currently not very well planted out, dare I say it. It could be utilised in a better way around major developments like airports and railway stations and the like. So, there's land that could be utilised. Obviously, that brings in attention with nature conservation, or does it? And so I think there's a really interesting piece around carbon sequestration through nature conservation and working with the nature conservation groups and utilising that land in a way that possibly we're not utilising it currently so effectively. So I may argue differently. I'm happy to hear.
Thank you so much. And we're 2 minutes from 4 o'clock, so we don't have time for any more questions. So I'd like to finish, well, firstly saying a massive thank you to Christine, Mel and Peter. It's been a real joy to talk to you all and hearing your views. It's been really, really interesting. And obviously to Alan for keeping an eye on the chat room. But most of all, to everyone listening in. It's good to know that so many people have been interested and also to get some great questions. It's lovely to hear everyone's questions and comments as well. So KTN is running a series of COVID webinars, and the next one we have is around infrastructure. So please make sure you're signed up to our newsletters, and we can tell you about those, and also our website. We're going to have a new website at the end of August when our new strategy is launched. So wait for that. So thank you very much, everyone, and have a lovely weekend. And we look forward to the next webinar, and take care. Bye-bye.